Hi everybody. Okay, what I'm going to show you here is a live coding system called Sonic Pi. By live coding, this is a way of taking computing, like how we control computers, and using it as live music performance. The system I'm going to show you is a simple and easy to learn one called Sonic Pi, and we'll show you how it actually sort of turns coding, writing of commands into a computer, into live music performance. So this is the interface we get. I'm going to change it around a little bit to make it look a bit more friendly. And various bits of this will become more obvious as I take you through this series of videos. Over here is the workspace where we actually type in things. So I can type in with the keyboard and we can make it do things. So we have some buttons: run, stop, record, save, and load. You can probably guess what some of those do. Some of the others will do interesting things. We'll talk about these later. But here you can see I've got a flashing cursor. I can edit and I can tell it to do things. What I'm going to tell it to do first is simply to play a MIDI note. Now 60 is the MIDI note number for middle C. So if I then run this code, it will then play a single note of middle C. Okay, so we saw that happen and we heard it happen. And now it's ready, it's stopped, and it's ready for us to play it again. Now, live coding in itself isn't very interesting unless you have music that is slightly more complicated than that. So, how can we make the music more complicated? One thing we could do is we could tell it to play more than one note. So I'm going to play 60, which is middle C, and 64, which is the E above middle C. Let's run this code, and this code is everything we see over here, and see what it does when we have two commands to play notes. What it's done is it's played both of the notes together. Playing both of the notes together can be interesting. Note that we have a command, which is play, and we have an argument of 60, which tells us which note to play. I can tell it to play even a third note. Okay, so we've got play 60. It'll play that note. Play 64, it'll play that note. And play 67, it'll play the note that follows it. And in this case, it plays three notes altogether. Now, why did it play them all at the same time instead of playing one of them after the other? The reason for this is that Sonic Pi has been designed from the ground up for use with music. And with music, we quite often want to have a whole lot of events happening at the same time. A chord is where we have three notes or four notes or whatever playing at the same time, and so therefore we need a way in Sonic Pi of making that happen. If you tell the computer to play the note middle C, as we do in this first command here, then it'll play that note and immediately look for the next thing to do and find, as the previous note is still playing, this command here to play, so it'll do that one, and then immediately look down here for this next note to play. And that's why if we play all three notes, if we run this code, we get all three notes happening at once. Okay, so what can we do to actually make these notes, for example, play at a slightly different time? Well, we can actually tell Sonic Pi to go to sleep for a bit and wait for some time. So I'm going to put a command in which is sleep 0.25. I'm also going to put one here, and I'm also going to put one down here for a reason which will become hopefully more obvious later on. If I play this code, it will go and follow all of my instructions to the letter. It will play the note middle C. It will then sleep for a certain amount of time. It will then play the note E. It will then sleep for a certain amount of time. It will then play the note G and then sleep for a certain amount of time and then finish because it's run out of things to do. What happens if we play this now? And you can see that it played the three notes with a pause in between each of the notes. Note that the pause in between the notes wasn't actually quite as long as the notes themselves, so if you listen carefully, you'll hear a bit of an overlap between the notes. If I change the arguments given to the commands, then of course it changes what the commands play. And I, for example, could add something extra to my code in order to make it play, again, something slightly different musically. Okay. Now, This bit of code here is a little bit boring because all it does is play the 4 notes and then stop. I said before that live coding is sort of like live performance with computer coding. So how is this live performance if it plays 4 notes and then stops? The way we get live performance out of live coding a lot of the time is to use what are called loops. And loops take code, for example this code here, and start repeating it. So I'm going to put loop, do, and then put down here an end. Now what I'm doing here is using what's called the syntax or grammar of the coding language we use in Sonic Pi. If I go loop do, it means it takes everything up to the next end and starts repeating that. Note I haven't told it to stop at any time, and this loop, the structure I have at the moment, will just keep on looping forever. So let's see what happens if I hit the run button. Okay, so we can see that it actually is now looping music. We might think, okay, over and above that, or underneath that little melody there, I want some drums. So what am I going to do? I want to play drum sounds, so I'm going to use a different command. The sample command will actually play a sample, and this one, colon followed by bd_house, is one of the built-in sounds into Sonic Pi. Sonic Pi is distributed all really to actually create music, and as part of that it has some built-in synthesizers you can use to synthesize sounds, and also quite a lot of built-in samples you can use, and, as we'll learn, a lot of ways to put these together to create music. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this, and I'm going to create the most boring dance music beat ever. So I'm hoping many of you will actually recognize the beat I've got. I've got a bass drum followed by a bass drum and a snare, a bass drum, slightly wrong, followed by a bass drum and a snare. That would have made a good example for later on, actually, so I might recover that error for later on. But if I play this, something interesting is going to happen. So we can see that it's playing the first loop, but it never ever plays any of these drum sounds. Now there's a reason why that happens. Fundamentally, the computer, by default, only does one thing at a time. We have to do special things to make it do more than one thing at a time, as, for example, we would expect to happen if we are playing quite complicated music. If you have a live band, you usually have multiple people doing different things at the same time, and that contributes to the complexity of the music. Very, very shortly, like in just about 1 minute, I'm going to show you how to get Sonic Pi doing multiple things at once so we can start building up the complexity of the music that we create. The reason why it only plays the first loop is because we tell it to actually loop this forever. It plays all this, gets to the bottom, goes back up to the top, plays it again, gets to the bottom, goes back up to the top, plays it all again, and continues on forever until we stop. So it never actually gets down here to actually play any of this music or drum pattern at all. So how are we going to make it play more than one thing at once? There are various ways of doing this, and later on I'm going to reintroduce you to these concepts in a more sort of sophisticated and more general way. But I'm going to change these to be what are called live loop. And I'm going to call this live loop mellow. And I'm going to call this one down here live loop. And I'll call that drums. If we set up what's called a live loop, then what happens is it starts the live loop playing, but then continues on down here to find if there's anything else it does. it finds another live loop, and it will set both of these live loops playing in the background, and eventually get down to the bottom. Eventually gets down to the bottom where this command, this print command, which is going to print something out to the log window over here, will run. So it's going to play this very, very shortly and stop it. Okay, so we can hear that it's actually playing the melody loop, that's playing. It's playing the drum loop, so that's playing as well. And if we scroll up here for all this useful, later on at least, information it's putting out, we should find that eventually it did actually say, I'm down at the bottom. So these print commands can be useful to print something into here so that you can actually track how your code is running, if it's doing something that you don't expect, which as soon as you do anything sophisticated with Sonic Pi, you will find starts to happen. With these live loops, I can also change them as things are running. For example, if I start this running, so if you watch what I was doing there, I was able to take these loops and actually change them in ways that I didn't find in Musically an improvement. So I'm going to just put these back for a bit. Ooh, go away. And I'm going to change these all back to bass drum house. Okay, and this time I'm going to start them and I'm going to add an extra loop as well, which hopefully will start playing over the top of the existing loops. This is showing important concepts that we can start music playing and we don't have to then just let it loop forever the same. We can keep on changing it as it's playing. So what should I do here when I add an additional live loop after I've started the other ones playing? Note that if we change a live loop, then if it's got the same name, then it replaces the one that's already playing. So if I start the drums playing and then change the drum pattern, providing it's still live loop drums, it'll replace the one that was previously playing and will do so on an even bar boundary to make the music more predictable. So let's see how that works. This loop down at the bottom here, I don't think it wasn't very obvious because too much was happening. So what I'm going to do is run it again and show you with one new command, which is going to be the last command I show you in this first movie, we can actually stop one of our live loops running. So let's run it again. We'll get all the music back again. So the stop command actually just stopped that live loop playing. If I wanted to start it again, well, that's quite easy. I'll put a stop on everything, though there are other ways of doing this, but I want to keep the number of commands down at the moment. So I'll say that everything stops, except I'll leave the two FX ones going. So start it again. Now, just as a summary, I've got a small number of commands here. Let's look at them. We've got play, which plays a MIDI note. We've got sleep, which sleeps for a time. We've got sample, which plays back a sample. And we've got stop. Over and above that, we're able to set up what are called live loops. Already, it starts sounding like we can actually do a fair amount of music here in terms of not only creating sort of sophisticated music, but also changing it over time. If we play around more, you're going to find that we're able to do more things as well. And every time we add a new command to the ones we know, it's going to increase dramatically the complexity and sophistication of the music we can create. And that's what live coding is about. It starts off, there's not much to learn. You start producing music, and over time you add more commands that you can use, more loops that you can use, other things you can use, and hey presto, the sophistication of the music you can create goes up dramatically. But even with what we got here, you can actually produce some reasonably interesting music. I highly recommend that if you're following this video series, that you stop now, and what you do is you start creating some music with just the commands we've got. You play around with live loops, you play around with adding live loops, you play around with starting them, you play around with the play and sample commands, you change their parameters, you look through all of the samples and other things built into Raspberry Pi that you can find and see what you can do to create music, even with just the 3 or 4 commands that you know at present. Okay, that's the end of this movie, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Thank you and goodbye.